Hi, my name is Rachel, and I used to think that stalkers were something you only heard about on the news or in thriller movies. I never thought it would happen to me, an ordinary 21-year-old college student just trying to get through exams and late-night study sessions. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't ghosts or demons, they're people. It started in my sophomore year when I moved off campus into a small apartment, just a 20-minute walk from the university. Rent was cheaper than the dorms, and I liked the independence. I didn't have a car, so I usually walked to and from classes. The route was pretty simple. 2 main roads, a short stretch of old houses, and then the big iron gate of my apartment complex. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet sometimes, the kind of place where people kept their blinds shut and didn't talk much to their neighbors. But one night, after staying late in the library for a research project, I noticed something odd. There was a man standing by the gate of my apartment complex. I remember clutching my bag tighter as I approached. He wasn't doing anything, just leaning against the brick pillar, smoking. He had this tall, lean frame with a hoodie pulled low over his face. I tried to brush it off. People hung around sometimes. Maybe he was waiting for a ride, but as I passed him, I felt his eyes follow me. My skin prickled. I hurried inside and locked the door behind me, telling myself I was overreacting. The next night, he was there again. Same spot, same hoodie. I avoided eye contact, fumbling for my keys, but I could feel it. The weight of his stare, heavy and deliberate. My heart was hammering by the time I got inside. I remember standing in my living room, all the lights off, peeking through the blinds. He stayed there for at least 10 minutes after I went in, just standing, watching. That was the beginning. At first I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was harmless. But then it escalated. One evening, I got out of class earlier than usual. The sun was still setting, painting the street orange, and I felt this strange sense of relief that I wouldn't have to walk home in the dark. But as I rounded the corner, I froze. He was there. Not by the gate this time, but across the street from the library, leaning against a lamppost. Same hoodie, same posture. Smoking, waiting. His head lifted just slightly when he saw me, like he'd been expecting me. Panic flared in my chest. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I ducked into a cafe and pretended to be on my phone, heart racing. I stayed there for almost an hour, and when I finally worked up the courage to leave, he was gone. That night, though, when I got to my apartment, he was back, by the gate. As if he knew I'd come eventually. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made me jolt awake. The following week, things got worse. I started noticing little things out of place. A footprint in the dirt beneath my bedroom window. The gate to the apartment complex slightly ajar when I was sure it had been locked. Once, I even found a cigarette butt right outside my window, crushed into the soil, the same brand he smoked. I wanted to tell someone, my roommate maybe, or campus security. But every time I opened my mouth, I felt stupid. What would I say? There's a guy standing around smoking near my apartment? People would think I was paranoid. But then came the phone calls. It started one night when I was studying. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, thinking it might be a wrong number, but there was only silence. Then, breathing. Slow, steady breathing. I hung up, heart pounding. The next night it happened again, and again, always around midnight. Always the same heavy, deliberate breathing on the other end. That was when I knew this wasn't in my head. Someone was watching me. Someone was following me. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had stayed late at a friend's dorm to work on a project, and by the time I started home, It was nearly 1 a.m. The streets were deserted. I clutched my phone like a lifeline, telling myself to just get home, lock the door, and crawl into bed. But halfway down the street, I heard it. Footsteps. Not close, but steady, matching my pace. I sped up. They sped up. I turned, and there he was, the man in the hoodie. This time, he wasn't standing still. He was walking, following me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I broke into a run, sprinting toward the apartment gate. My keys shook in my hand, slipping against my sweaty fingers. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me, closer, closer. I fumbled with the lock, nearly dropping the keys when a car suddenly turned the corner. Its headlights washed over the street, and just like that, he was gone. I don't know where he went. 1 second he was there. The next he had vanished into the shadows. I collapsed inside my apartment, sobbing, every muscle trembling with adrenaline. The next morning, I went straight to the police. I gave them everything, the description, the phone calls, the cigarette butts. They listened, took notes, and told me they'd look into it. But I could see it in their faces. They didn't think it was serious. That same day, I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's dorm for a week. I couldn't bring myself to go back to my apartment alone. When I finally did, the first thing I noticed was the dirt outside my bedroom window. There was a footprint, pressed deep into the soil, facing the glass. I never saw him again after that. Maybe the police scared him off, or maybe he just moved on to someone else. But I'll never forget the feeling of his eyes following me. The sound of his footsteps behind me in the dark. The way he knew exactly where I lived, where I studied, where I walked every night. Even now, years later, I still can't walk home alone without looking over my shoulder. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear breathing on the other end of the line. Because the truth is, stalkers aren't always caught. They don't always go to jail. Sometimes they just disappear. And the scariest part? They could still be out there, watching, waiting. My name is Ethan, and I used to drive for a rideshare company, part-time. At first, it felt like easy money, pick people up, drop them off, smile, and repeat. I liked the freedom, the late-night drives, the feeling that I was in control of my own schedule. But there's one passenger I'll never forget, and I wish I could. It was a Saturday night in late October. The city was buzzing with college kids in costumes, bar hoppers spilling into the streets, and drunks stumbling into ride shares. I'd been driving since 7 p.m., and by 1 a.m., I was exhausted, but decided to take one last ride before heading home. The ping came from a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of downtown. I pulled up to a dimly lit curb, expecting a group of drunk friends. Instead, there was just one guy. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with thinning hair and pale skin. He wore a black jacket zipped up to his chin, even though the night was warm. What struck me first were his eyes, dark, unblinking, fixed on me even before he got in the car. "Ethan?" he asked, his voice flat. I nodded. He slid into the back seat, not next to the window like most people, but directly behind me. Something about that made my stomach tighten. "Where to?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He leaned forward slightly. "Just drive." "I'll tell you where to go." Every instinct screamed at me to cancel the ride, but I didn't want trouble, so I drove. He guided me through the empty streets, giving directions in a slow, deliberate tone. Left, right, straight. We weren't heading downtown or toward any apartment complex I recognized. Instead, he was leading me deeper into the outskirts of the city, areas where streetlights were few and houses sat far apart. "You drive nights a lot?" he asked suddenly. "Yeah," I said, gripping the wheel tighter. Smart, he murmured. Less people. Less eyes. I forced a laugh, pretending it was a harmless comment, but my skin prickled. After about 20 minutes of random turns, we ended up in front of a dead-end street with nothing but trees on either side. My pulse spiked. This the spot? I asked. He leaned closer, so close I could see his reflection in the rearview mirror. No, he whispered. Keep going. There's nowhere else to go, I said, my voice shaky. He smiled, just a thin curve of his lips. Then stop here. I froze. He sat back, silent, staring at me through the mirror. The air felt suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, he finally opened the door and stepped out. But before closing it, he leaned down and said, I'll see you again. Then he disappeared into the trees. I drove off so fast, my tires screeched. I reported the ride to the company, but all they said was they'd investigate. The man hadn't technically done anything illegal. For days, I couldn't shake his words. I'll see you again. And then he did. 3 nights later, I got off work at my day job around midnight. I walked to my car in the nearly empty parking garage. As I slid into the driver's seat, my headlights flickered on. That's when I saw him. The same man. Standing at the far end of the garage, half hidden in the shadows. Just watching. I slammed the door, locked it, and sped out of there. By the time I looked back, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe I was just paranoid. But the sightings kept happening. At the grocery store, I caught a glimpse of him near the frozen foods. On the highway, a black car tailed me for miles before disappearing. Too far back to see the driver, but I knew. Once, I even found a cigarette butt leaning against my apartment doorframe. I don't smoke. The worst night came a week later. I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, when I heard it, a soft scraping sound at my window. My apartment was on the 2nd floor. I froze, staring at the glass, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. A figure standing on the fire escape. Slowly, deliberately, a hand pressed against the glass, pale, long fingers. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. By the time the police arrived, the fire escape was empty. No signs of forced entry, no evidence, just a faint smear of fingerprints on the glass. They told me it was probably a prank, maybe a drunk neighbor, but I knew it was him. I quit driving for the rideshare company after that. I even moved apartments, changed my number, and stopped working late shifts. For a while, I thought it was over. But 2 months later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a single rideshare receipt, dated the night I first picked him up. Scrawled across it, in black marker, were 3 words. I found you. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he's still watching. But every time I see a man in a black jacket on the street, every time I hear footsteps behind me in an empty parking lot, my blood runs cold. Because what if one night, I take the wrong turn again? What if next time, he doesn't just disappear into the trees? Hi, my name is Claire, and this is the story of how my friendly neighbor turned out to be the most terrifying presence in my life. It all began 2 years ago when I moved into a small apartment complex in a quiet, suburban area just outside of the city. The rent was affordable, the street was lined with maple trees that looked beautiful in autumn, and the building was filled with young professionals like myself. I thought I had found the perfect place to start fresh after a bad breakup. What I didn't know was that the man who lived 2 doors down would change everything. The first time I saw him, it seemed harmless enough. It was my 2nd day in the building, and I was carrying groceries up the stairs. That's when I heard a voice behind me. Need a hand? I turned and saw a man in his late 40s. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair slicked back neatly. His clothes were plain, but his smile was wide, too wide, stretching across his face in a way that immediately made me uneasy. "I've got it, thanks," I said politely, continuing up the stairs. But he followed. "I'm Gary. Apartment 204. I guess we're neighbors now." "Claire," I replied, giving a quick smile and hurrying to my door. That should have been the end of it. Just a neighbor introducing himself. But even then, there was something about the way he looked at me. Too long, too focused, like he wasn't just being friendly. At first, it was small things. Whenever I came home from work, Gary seemed to appear in the hallway at the exact same time. He'd be taking out his trash or checking his mail, but always watching. "Long day, Claire?" he'd ask. "New haircut, Claire? Looks nice. Working late again, huh?" I never told him about my job or my schedule or anything personal, but somehow he seemed to know. One night, I came home past midnight after meeting friends, and as I unlocked my door, I heard his voice behind me. "A little late to be out alone, isn't it?" He was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, just staring. I laughed nervously and went inside, locking the door quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, had he been waiting for me to come home? Things escalated a few weeks later. One Saturday morning, I stepped out of the shower and nearly screamed. On my kitchen counter was a small vase with fresh flowers. I hadn't bought them. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. Had I forgotten? Had I been drunk and bought flowers I didn't remember? But no, the vase wasn't even mine. When I asked the building manager about it, she shrugged. "Oh, Gary said he left them. Said he noticed you looked stressed lately and thought you could use something nice." My stomach dropped. He had been inside my apartment. The manager explained he'd been helpful in the past when other tenants locked themselves out, that he sometimes fixed small things. But I had never asked him to enter. From that day forward, I started double-checking every lock. Then the letters began. At first, they were slipped under my door, short notes written in neat handwriting. "You look beautiful in blue today. I heard you laughing last night. Your laugh is lovely. You don't have to be alone. I'm right here. I tried to brush it off. Tell myself maybe he was just socially awkward. But then one arrived that chilled me to the bone. I watch you sleep sometimes. You look so peaceful, I dropped the paper like it was on fire." My chest tightened, and I felt like the walls of my apartment were closing in. That meant he had been inside while I was sleeping. I went to the police. They took my statement, looked at the letters, and promised to have a word with him. But because there was no evidence of forced entry and no physical harm, all they could do was warn him to leave me alone. When they spoke to Gary, he played the part of the concerned neighbor. He told them he was just looking out for me, that maybe I misunderstood, that he only wanted to be friendly. The officers left, and that night I found another note. "You shouldn't have done that, Claire. Now I know you don't trust me." From then on, things spiraled. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to faint noises, like someone breathing outside my bedroom door. When I rushed to check, nothing was there, but I'd find tiny things out of place. A chair moved. A picture frame turned. One morning, I discovered a lock of hair on my pillow. Long, dark strands. My hair. Someone had cut it while I slept. I started staying at friends' places whenever I could, but I couldn't afford to move right away. Every time I returned home, I felt like I was stepping into a trap. Once I caught him outside the laundry room, just standing there, holding one of my shirts in his hands. When he saw me, he smiled. "You smell like vanilla," he said softly. I ripped the shirt away from him and ran. The breaking point came one night when I was alone in my apartment, watching TV with the lights low. I heard it. The sound of my balcony door sliding open. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the glass doors. Gary was standing there, inside my apartment. "Claire," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "We don't need to pretend anymore. You know we belong together," I screamed and ran for my bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. My hands shook as I dialed 911. He pounded on the door, shouting, "Don't shut me out! You're mine, Claire. You've always been mine." I could hear the wood cracking as he tried to force his way in. My sobs drowned out the sound of his fist hitting the door. Finally, sirens wailed outside. He bolted before the police arrived, but this time, I had proof. The officer saw the damage, found his fingerprints, and arrested him. Gary was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and harassment. They discovered he had a history: a restraining order from a previous neighbor, complaints from former landlords, but somehow he had always slipped through the cracks. He was sentenced to a few years, but not nearly enough for what he had done. I moved far away, changed my number, and never told anyone my new address. But the trauma lingers. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I sometimes hear that whisper in the dark, "You've always been mine." And sometimes, when I walk down a crowded street, I swear I catch a glimpse of him, watching from the other side and waiting for the day he finds me again.